So yeah, you can be at the pinnacle of dynasty fantasy football assets when you have that rushing Konami upside, and Lamar Jackson is no different. Who Akash wanted to hit on the point that he's probably a bit undervalued for what we know him to be, what his profile is.
Yeah, it's hard to make that into very actionable advice, except for if you're pivoting off of a guy like Joe Burrow or Jonathan Taylor, because they're very similar in their values. But I would absolutely pivot off of both those guys for Lamar Jackson. But he's just a guy I would want to trade for in general because he's a very high ceiling player. He probably has the highest ceiling out of any quarterback in the league for fantasy football, higher than Josh Allen and higher than Patrick Mahomes because of what we saw during that 2019 season. I want to talk about demonstrated elite ceilings. We've seen Lamar demonstrate that he has an elite ceiling. We saw back in his 2019 season, he's been a good passer throughout his whole career, and he rushes a lot. Everyone knows that. But for some reason, people continue to fade Lamar. Not a ton, not to like the second round of your startup drafts, but he's going as a QB5 or QB6 when, for me, he's my QB3. And on Keep Trade Cut, he's going 8th and in Superflex ADP, and for me, he's 3rd. And it's just a discrepancy that you can try to take advantage of because in his range of outcomes for 2022, he has the 2019 season Lamar Jackson in his range of outcomes. And that's a big reason why I'm basically all in on this Baltimore offense because they have a bunch of good players. They have a really good quarterback. They have Mark Andrews, who was just a tight end 1. Tight end premium, he had like 20 points per game. They have Hollywood Brown, who everyone on Twitter sees me talking about because he's earned a really high target share over the past 2 years. Like over the player's second and third year, the only player since 2010 to have a 25% target share in their second and third year are AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, George Kittle, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, Josh Gordon, and AJ Green. It's just a list full of studs. Marquise Brown has earned targets at a very high rate throughout his entire career. He's been dominating every year of football in his NFL career. And so I expect him to do nothing short of continue to dominate the targets yet again. And he has a good quarterback, and he's in a good offense. And so I'm all in on this offense. I also love Rashad Bateman.
Well, it just all became so clear to me why Kosh wanted to talk about Lamar Jackson. He kind of hit me before the show and said we could talk about Lamar Jackson. He's undervalued. And about halfway through his shtick on Lamar Jackson, I realized he only wanted to talk about Marquise Brown, and he found out he could just pivot there way easier than anything else. So he still found a way to.
The Hollywood propaganda, it thrives. It thrives. This morning, I had like 5 people send me a tweet where someone was talking about how they didn't like Hollywood Brown. I just thought that was really funny.
Mr. Hollywood himself is you. But speaking of Lamar Jackson, so like with the rushing, first of all, we all know Lamar Jackson has that break fantasy football upside because of his rushing. The last 3 years, he's been above 30%, which last year actually was at 36.5%, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. But part of that's not having like Dobbins, Edwards. He had to take more of the rushing load in an offense that likes to rush the ball. But besides the point, he's someone who's going to put up a 30% carry rate next year. Like that's a given. And then when we talk about passing, so one interesting thing that like we're talk about a lot is clean PFF pass grade, because that's the grade, the passing grade that you have when you're kept clean, when the pocket is okay for you to make. I don't know the exact definitions, but they also have normal pass grade. And so when you compare the two, you can see, okay, well, his clean PFF pass grade's way better than his pass grade. Well, that's because he wasn't kept clean a lot. So a lot more of his throws were on the run, outside of the pocket, under a ton of pressure. So you can get like a good sense of how the situation is for him throwing. So Lamar Jackson had his worst throwing season since his rookie year last year. But when we look at clean PFF pass grade, his MVP year 88.3, his third year 80.8, and last year 80.3. He was still throwing the clean in the clean pocket the same as he has since his second year. But then when we look at pass grade, he had a 65.9 last year, which isn't good. the last 2 years before that, 76.9, 85.3, we could see for him to have a clean pass grade that much higher than his pass grade, he just was not being kept upright a lot, you'd have to assume. And he was making a lot more of his throws on the run under pressure, which in turn usually ends up being worse because So that's probably part of the reason we can look back and say, wow, Lamar Jackson wasn't this break fantasy football player that he could have been in year 3, or in year 4. But that doesn't change going forward to year 5 because he's the Lamar Jackson that he's been. He just needs to be kept clean, just situational stuff. But he's still the same Lamar Jackson, offers a QB1 floor.
That's right. And then going back to the whole offense, one of the concerns I hear about supporting Andrews, Hollywood, Bateman is that there's simply not enough volume to go around because they're going to go back to their old, very run heavy ways once they get Dobbins back and they get Edwards back. First of all, for 2 running backs coming off of ACL tears, expecting a full recovery. Obviously, medicine has gotten better over the years, but it shouldn't be an absolute certainty. And second of all, everyone has pretty much internalized the fact that passing the ball is a lot more efficient than running the ball, especially when you have a really good quarterback like Lamar Jackson. And so when they had Lamar passing a lot in 2019, their offense was quite good before Lamar got hurt and they had to bring in Josh Johnson and Tyler Huntley. It didn't show up as much on the stat sheet, but when you pass more, you're going to have a more efficient offense. And so for them to go back to those archaic dead ball era offensive ways that they had in 2019 and 2020, I just don't see it happening as much. I do think it comes down from the 9th highest volume that they had in 2021 back to closer to league average, probably a little bit below just because of the getting those running backs back. But I don't expect their volume to go back to what it was in 2019 and 2020, where they were throwing under 30 attempts per game. So that doesn't really worry me as far as like the floor for those guys.
Yeah, and they also drafted Rashad Bateman in the first round last year,
Right.
Which is kind of a franchise. Like when a franchise drafts a player, receiver in the first round, they're usually saying we want more weapons because we want to throw more.
Yeah,
and
they've done nothing but indicate they want to throw more.
Yeah, and to Akash's point, something Akash says a lot is good offenses are created by good players. So when we talk about like passing offenses or in tying it with receiving offenses, so passing offenses, it gets better with better players. So when they're taking Rashad Bateman in the first round, despite having Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews, who we know are good receiving options, they're grabbing another one because they want another good player in that passing offense. So,
and furthermore, having good players in your passing offense just makes your offense better. Means you're going to probably score more, probably going to extend drives longer, have more plays, pass for more yards. So there's just the pie gets bigger when you have a better offense. And that helps everyone. It's not just they're taking away from each other. They're capping each other's ceiling. They're increasing the ceiling for the whole offense. And that's great for us.
And that's how we see those players get the same target shares year over year because the pie just gets bigger generally. You don't see too much of the players' percentage of the pie getting worse for other players because those players are dictating the volume of that offense in a sense. Yeah. And then another point that you were talking about, like with J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards, where like they could go back to that archaic offense because now they have those 2 running backs back. Well, besides them like kind of hinting to us that they want to pass more, and then they actually did pass more last year. They were like 9th or something in pass attempts. Yeah. Which sure you could say is a little bit game script, but you don't get to 9th with terrible game script only. Mm-hmm. Like you still have to want to throw the ball and throw the ball. And Lamar Jackson had his highest second year is 31% carry rate, second year or third year is 30%. Last year's 36.5%. So right in that like closer to 40 than he is to 30. You'd have to assume that's part of him taking some part of the offense, rushing offense with Dobbins and Edwards out. Mm-hmm. So if they come back, you'll probably see Lamar's carry percentage go a little bit lower because those players are back and they can go back to that. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to pass the ball. They don't want to be a passing offense. They are telling us that they want to be a passing offense.
Yeah, 100%. You hit the nail on the head.